During the Second World War, all commodities were in short supply, cinefilm being no exception. As a consequence, very little archive film of Sheffield during the Second World War exists today. Of the film that does survive, we've included in this collection some of the very best. To our great benefit today, Bill Baker, a photographer on the staff at the Sheffield Star newspaper, had access to a cine camera and a small store of precious film in the early days of the war. He used this advantage to the full, making the most of the film stock he had to capture what happened in the wartime city. Perhaps most important of all, Bill Baker captured the devastated city centre soon after the Blitz of December 1940. Footage that brings home the full horror of 2 nights of concentrated German bombing. Without Bill Baker, Sheffield would have been deprived of this vital film record.
In the 1939-45 World War, Britain's industrial cities and the people who lived there were in the front line. Sheffield was no exception, and most people here knew that eventually their city would get it. They were right. More than 600 died through enemy action in Sheffield, most of them in 2 horrific raids which took place in December 1940. More than 1,800 people were injured. Some 33,000 homes were destroyed or damaged. It's all now part of history, but the history of Sheffield at war comes to life thanks to star cameraman Bill Baker. Using his managing director's camera and some long-forgotten film found in a drawer, Bill Baker placed on record the tragedy and the horror of wartime Sheffield. He also recaptured the spirit of the times and the humour which kept Sheffield going at its darkest hour. This then is Bill Baker's view of Sheffield at war. The pictures are his. The words are as he described it many years later. Despite the ferocity of German attacks elsewhere in Britain, many people here were lulled into a false sense of security. They simply didn't believe that Sheffield would have to endure the sort of blitz that flattened Coventry. And so, on the night of December the 12th, 1940, the city centre was busy. The theatres, cinemas and dance halls were all crowded. Then came the sirens, and the blitz was on. The damage was incredible. Shops, offices, factories, homes, all turned to rubble. For many people in those first few hours, the city was a Dante's Inferno. They simply didn't know where to turn. They had to rely on the air raid wardens, and luckily they at least knew what to do. They'd been prepared for 2 years to help in just such an emergency. Norton was a training centre for Royal Air Force volunteers. They came from all over the country. The occasion here was a visit of the Duke of Kent to inspect new recruits, hundreds of them. The Duke had arrived in an aircraft more suited to World War I, for the Spitfires and the Hurricanes were needed urgently further south. Just how well recruits responded to appeals to come forward to fight the Germans is evident from the hundreds of people on parade here at Norton. Remember, just one training centre out of the hundreds throughout the country. Incidentally, these are among the last pictures ever taken of the Duke of Kent, for soon he was to die in a plane crash in Scotland. While scenes like this were going on at Norton and at other airfields in the locality, other people too were getting ready for the conflict. Into battle. Here the Home Guard was Britain's last line of defence. You can see here two people sending out semaphores from the top of the old Star building on the corner of York Street and High Street. Most of these people were workers on Sheffield newspapers. Remember that in addition to their duties in the Home Guard, they were also working at all hours to get the papers out on time. Indeed, there were only 2 occasions when the papers had to be printed elsewhere because of blitz damage. By the way, this unit was a good deal luckier than some. At least they had guns and, from all accounts, it looks as though they know how to use them. Many other units had nothing but pike staffs and pick handles when they came to their mock battle. This is how the book said you had to deal with an incendiary bomb. First, you needed a stirrup pump and a piece of hosepipe. That was a job you had to lie down on. Stirrup pumps were greedy things, and there were always plenty of people standing by to give some helpful advice. Thank goodness there was a fire brigade. These same ARP wardens and firemen were to become heroes when the testing time came. And that testing time wasn't long in coming. The sirens sounded 130 times in Sheffield during the war, sending people scurrying to their air raid shelters and cellars. As you can see from the devastation here, those air raid shelters were very necessary indeed. The worst raids, of course, were between December the 12th and 15th, when more than 300 Nazi bombers blitzed the city for hour after hour after hour. The Marples Hotel in Fitzallen Square. Nearly 70 people died here when the hotel was completely demolished by a direct hit. Next morning, 7 people were dragged to safety from out of the cellar. Rescue workers were astonished. Nobody really ever knew just how many people died in that single tragedy. Factories, shops and offices like this one here, with a safe that incidentally contained just a solid lump of silver when it was opened, silver which had started out as cash. All these buildings were hit. There was no kind of discrimination. Oddly enough, though, the city's industrial East End on that first night escaped the worst of the damage. By late that night, and certainly as dawn broke on the 13th, the city was unrecognizable. Walsh's department store. At one time, it seemed to have escaped the Holocaust, but a strengthening of the wind and a sudden change of direction sent sparks through the shattered windows of the Emporium, and soon that too was an inferno.
Bound for old blighty shore, heavily laden with time-expired men, bound for the land they adore. There's many an airman just finishing his time, there's many a twerp signing on. You'll get no promotion this side of the ocean, so cheer up, my lads, bless 'em all. Bless 'em all, bless 'em all, bless 'em all, the long and the short and the tall. Bless all.
It's amazing to see the damage and to realize that much of this could have been prevented if people had been able to get at the incendiary bombs within the first few minutes. There was as much damage by fire as there was by bombing, and many of the buildings were so badly damaged that the next day, even during the next week, they had to be demolished. Nevertheless, with public roads blocked, scarred and pitted with bomb craters, it wasn't many hours before public transport was underway again. People were on their way to work, walking, many of them, having to make detours because of the dangerous buildings, because they simply couldn't find their way. But get to work they did. The war effort had to continue. Another shot of Walsh's shows the extent of the damage. And remember, that was just one store. By late on the night of the 12th, the whole of the moor was a blazing inferno, a straight half-mile of flames, an arrow pointing to the industrial heart of the city. If the Germans had followed that arrow, who knows what would have happened to our war production. Another of the problems facing people as they tried to find their place of work was that when they arrived there, their offices and shops had simply disappeared. Often the whole block was missing. Another hazard for pedestrians were the unexploded bombs, such as those in Snig Hill and Angel Street, which were detonated after the all clear. People had to make complicated detours. It wasn't just our homes, our work that suffered. Even our precious moments of leisure were under attack. This is Bramall Lane, after the first night of the Blitz. And here are some of the homes in that locality. Extra buses had to be drafted in from other towns in the region because many of the tram cars and our existing buses had been blasted off the roads. Special reception centres had to be set up overnight to house the people who were brought from houses like this. And it says a tremendous amount for the morale of the citizens of Sheffield that on this morning, after a night of terror, after a hasty breakfast in a refugee camp, because that's what they were, and sometimes not knowing whether their families were still alive, most people packed up their food, their sandwiches, and went off to work as usual. It was on the second night of the Blitz that the suburbs took the brunt of the attack. On that night, the German attack began about Norton and worked its way around the eastern side of the city, down as far as Tinsley and Attercliffe. Thousands more people were left homeless, thousands more flocked into air raid shelters, and later in the day, they flocked to the reception centres and the sleeping centres. Hundreds of luckier people in other parts of the city, particularly to the southwest, opened their homes for the refugees. For many, there was good cause for Thanksgiving. But where could they go? The churches themselves had been damaged. One of the first churches to suffer bomb damage was St. Mark's at Broom Hill. But it was by no means the only one. Happily, the cathedral survived, but this is the area surrounding it. A look at Campo Lane, Vicar Lane. And remember, all these were shops and flats and houses, people's homes. The strange thing is, there were no cases of serious looting at any stage in the Blitz in Sheffield. Instead, people worked together as a team. By the power of the German Luftwaffe's attack, people took the view that, well, they'd endured the worst that the Germans could throw at them. They'd put up with the Blitz, they could put up with anything. And they did. One of the fears that most people had at that time was poison gas. It was used in the First World War. Plans had to be made because people really thought Hitler might use it again in the Second. Britain was taking no chances. Gas masks were issued very early on in the war. In Sheffield, the authorities staged a mock gas attack in and around Fargate. The signal for gas was the sound of a rattle. Of course, everyone was issued with gas masks, even the babies had them, and it was obligatory to carry them wherever you went. It was important that people should know that their gas masks would work. Obviously, no one could use gas to test them, so smoke canisters were used instead. It was all very exciting and harmless, luckily. But it was certainly very necessary for morale. There goes the handbell. That's the signal to say that the air is clear again, that people can take off their masks and go on about their normal business. But their normal business was bleak in the winter of 1940. It was one of the worst winters on record. Morale was at a pretty low ebb. People hadn't enough food, hadn't enough light, hadn't enough heat. So it was a tremendous boost to everyone's morale when King George VI and the Queen visited Sheffield. They chatted to people, they saw the damage, they shared in the grief of the citizens. The royal couple spoke to many Sheffield people that winter day. They showed they cared, and Sheffield was quick to respond to their thoughtfulness. Crowds mobbed them wherever they stopped. Despite the devastation, despite the deprivations, they were met by smiling faces. This was something for Sheffielders to really shout about. Some proof that the Nazis were being beaten back. The Star had sponsored the savings appeal, which brought this Messerschmitt fighter into Sheffield. It had been shot down in the Battle of Britain. It went on display in Barker's Pool, and people could see it, even touch it and sit in the cockpit. Needless to say, it was a great favourite with the boys. Hundreds of people turned up, far more than had been expected. But what was needed then was more money to buy more anti-aircraft guns and more Spitfires to shoot down more German planes. But it wasn't just planes and guns. 72 barrage balloons guarded the skies above Sheffield, and they were designed to stop the German bombers from diving accurately. They did their work well. So did the women, because as the war progressed, women took over the job of crewing these balloons. Sheffield was the very first city in which the Women's Royal Air Force took over this ceaseless and arduous task. It was a job that called for plenty of muscle power.
There's a boy coming home on leave. There's a girl wanting home on leave. She'll meet him right at the station.
Hanging on to those balloon wires in a high wind was certainly no joke.
There's a boy coming home.
And you didn't have to mind getting your hands dirty either. There were always plenty of dirty jobs to do.
It's grand to know the sums are up in England. The sign that shows that everything's okay.
But these women did double duty. They very soon realised they could also grow much-needed vegetables alongside their balloons, so they helped to dig for victory.
And say it's tickety-boo, 'cause tickety-boo means everything will be fine. You'll always wear a smile if you'll only say it's tickety-boo.
When they had time, of course.
Tickety-boo, tickety-boo today. Put your thumbs up and say it's tickety-boo. We're going to show the world who's who. And it's the day when the little chorus. Thumbs up, tickety-boo, tickety-boo.
These girls are from Bachelor's Factory. Not content with putting peas in cans, when the peas were ripe, they went down to the fields in Lincolnshire and picked them for themselves. Wonder what the union would say about that today. And if the girls weren't in the forces or in a factory, then they could join the land army. This group are a bunch of new recruits. They're on instruction on a farm outside Worksop.
The boys have brought a word back home to England. For over there they always used to say, put your thumbs up and say it's tickety-boo, 'cause tickety-boo means everything will be fine. You'll always wear a smile if you'll only say it's tickety-boo, tickety-boo, tickety-boo today. Put your thumbs up and say it's tickety-boo. We're going to show the world who's who. And this is how you end your little chorus.
Time for
thumbs
rest.
up, tickety-boo, tickety-boo. I converted it, something. This little word is typical of England.
And when one group of girls stopped, there was always another group to take their place. That really was the pattern of wartime Sheffield. Work, sleep, work, sleep. And very, very little time for entertainment. Bill Baker's film was limited. He didn't have any opportunity to get further supplies. Nevertheless, it demonstrates the fine achievements in many fields of service. His film tells, too, of the sacrifices of a people in the common cause, of their ordeal by fire and bomb, of their unflagging labour throughout the weary years of the war. It was people like these Sheffielders who gave fighting men the tools with which they finished the job.
Vic Wright, a builder assigned to blitz clearance and repair during the war, was another Sheffield resident with access to a cine camera. Unlike Bill Baker, who focused on the blitz, Vic documented some of the community spirit and special events of the war. His collection of film brings back some of those moments. Here, the National Fire Service No. 3 area, a scene in their display and tournament of September 1942. Given a chance to show their skills, Sheffield B2 team were the victors in the major pump drill. In wartime, everyone plays their part, especially the ladies. An important role, communication, was played by cycling regional messengers. Seen here competing in a relay race, the ultimate winners were the Leeds No. 4 team. Expected to work in all conditions, the Sheffield A Division team proved they could handle their light trailer pump blindfold. And did so with a winning time of 45 seconds. I wonder if they did. Vic Wright was also granted a special license to film in the city centre and was able to record for posterity one of the many parades held to raise money for war funds, involving all branches of the armed forces, emergency services, civil defence and other auxiliary services, and local voluntary organisations. These parades were also great morale boosters. Alongside the parades, a display of aeroplanes gave an opportunity for local people to see the machines that were taking the war back to the Germans. Vic was also a member of the Home Guard and took his camera to Millhouses Park, recording A Company from Eccleshall giving a public display. These real-life members of Dad's Army may have been volunteers, but they were drilled as strictly as their regular comrades. Weapons training was an integral part of the drill, including the important gas mask practice. And after a short break, it's time for a display of unarmed combat and self-defense. These displays demonstrated the full range of training needed by members of the Home Guard, always under the very real threat of the invasion of Britain. Not organized purely as morale-boosting entertainment, these displays were also used to recruit new members. And in traditional Yorkshire fashion, there's no shortage of volunteers. And to start them off on the right foot, or should that be the left, training begins immediately. And you're never too young to start learning. That's what I like to see.